The living room was quiet except for the low hum of the television, its faint glow casting a soft light over Ethan and Lily. They sat side by side on the worn couch, their faces bathed in flickering colors that danced across their expressions of curiosity and anticipation. The night before, they'd stumbled upon something that had felt almost forbidden. A show clearly meant for grown-up people, filled with moments of laughter, tension, and gestures that seemed foreign but intriguing. It wasn't just the characters or the scenes that held their attention. It was the mystery of it all, the sense that they were peeking into a world they didn't yet understand. And now, as if drawn by an invisible thread, they found themselves back in front of the glowing screen. The questions left lingering from the night before whispered in their minds, unspoken but persistent, urging them to watch more, to uncover what had been left unsaid. Ethan clutched the remote tightly, his small fingers brushing over the familiar buttons as he navigated back to the channel with precision born of determination. The quiet house seemed to grow heavier with every second, the silence amplifying the faint sound of the TV's hum. His gaze flicked toward the hallway, his heart pounding slightly as he strained to hear any movement, any sign that their parents might still be awake. The coast was clear, but his nervousness remained, crackling beneath the surface. When he finally turned to Lily, his voice was quiet but firm, carrying a sense of urgency. "Are you sure you want to watch?" he asked, his eyes searching her face. There was something in his tone that hinted at doubt, a small voice in the back of his mind that wondered if they were stepping into territory they shouldn't. Lily hesitated, her wide eyes glancing nervously between the blank screen and Ethan's expectant face. Her small fingers gripped the edges of the blanket draped around her shoulders, pulling it tighter as though the soft fabric could shield her from the growing unease bubbling in her chest. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the TV. She glanced toward the dim hallway, her brows furrowing slightly. "It feels weird." The hesitation in her tone wasn't just about what they were doing. It was the way the air seemed heavier when the screen was on, as if the images it showed carried a weight she couldn't quite name. Her fingers fiddled with the blanket's edge, her gaze dropping for a moment before returning to Ethan. The room seemed smaller somehow, the shadows darker, the glow of the TV pulling her in despite the uncertainty flickering in her mind. Ethan tilted his head, his curiosity growing stronger than the small pang of unease he felt in his stomach. "It's just a show," he said with a shrug as though the words could erase the tension in the air. He pressed a button on the remote and the screen came to life with a flicker and a faint crackle of static. There they were again, the man and woman they'd seen the night before. This time they were seated at a table, the warm glow of candlelight dancing across their faces, illuminating every subtle expression. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his focus narrowing on the scene. The way the man's head tilted, the way the woman's fingers brushed the rim of her glass. It was all so deliberate, so charged with a meaning he couldn't quite grasp. Their voices, soft but quick, filled the room with a rhythm that felt both familiar and foreign. "What are they saying?" Lily asked, her brows pulling together as she tried to follow the flow of the conversation. Her eyes darted back and forth between the two figures, searching their faces for answers. "I don't know," Ethan replied after a moment, his gaze locked on the screen. He noticed the way the man leaned forward, his hand reaching across the table in a gesture that seemed both tentative and purposeful. "But it looks important." There was something about the scene that held them both still, their young minds grappling with the emotions unfolding before them. The soft clinking of the glasses on the table, the low murmur of their voices. It all felt intimate, like a secret they weren't supposed to be privy to. As the man's fingers brushed against the woman's hand, Lily shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She pulled the blanket tighter around her, her movements small but deliberate. "Why are they doing that?" she asked softly, her voice carrying a mix of innocence and unease. Her wide eyes flicked toward Ethan, searching for an explanation that might make sense of the strange emotions stirring within her. Ethan shrugged again, though this time his response felt slower, more hesitant. "Maybe it's How grown-ups talk, he said, his voice quiet. You know, like when mom and dad sit together. His words hung in the air, not entirely convincing even to himself. He glanced at Lily, noticing the way she hugged the blanket to her chest as though she wanted to create a barrier between herself and the screen. The scene felt heavier than before, the weight of it pressing down on them both. Ethan's gaze flicked back to the screen, his stomach twisting slightly. Whatever this was, it felt important. But it also felt like they were stepping into something far bigger than they could understand. But they don't look happy, Lily said, her voice tinged with confusion. She tilted her head, squinting at the screen as though it might reveal more. Do you think they're pretending? Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. Something about the scene on the screen felt too heavy, too real, even though he couldn't explain why. He leaned back against the couch, his small frame sinking into the worn cushions. It's just a show, he said again, more to himself than to Lily. But the show had a grip on them, pulling them deeper into its world. The scenes shifted. Now the man and woman were outside, walking under a street lamp, their shadows stretching across the pavement. They were laughing again, their voices mingling with the sound of crickets in the background. Ethan and Lily watched intently, their young faces illuminated by the glow of the TV. It's pretty, Lily whispered almost to herself. Like when we play outside at night. Ethan nodded, but he felt a strange tightness in his chest. The way the man and woman moved, the way they looked at each other, felt far removed from the games he and Lily played. It wasn't like tag or hide-and-seek. It was something else, something he couldn't name. He glanced at his sister, wondering if she felt it too. The next morning, the living room was quiet again. The TV sat silent, but the images from the night before lingered in their minds. Lily stood in the doorway, clutching the edge of her blanket. Ethan, she said hesitantly, do you think we should stop watching it? Ethan looked up from the couch, his expression carefully neutral, almost as if he were trying to convince himself as much as Lily. Why would we stop? He asked, his voice steady but without its usual confidence. We're not doing anything wrong. His words hung in the air, filling the silence between them, but even as he spoke, a small knot tightened in his stomach. He glanced at Lily, searching her face for reassurance, but her uncertain expression only deepened his own doubts. Lily bit her lip, her small hands fidgeting nervously in her lap. She felt the weight of her brother's words but couldn't shake the unease that had settled over her like a shadow. It just doesn't feel like it's for us, she said softly, her voice trembling with the innocence of a child trying to make sense of something far beyond her understanding. The words weren't an accusation, just an honest observation, but they struck Ethan like a quiet challenge. Ethan frowned, his gaze darting toward the TV, which sat blank and silent but seemed to loom over the room like an unspoken presence. He felt a pang of guilt, sharp and sudden, but he pushed it aside, burying it beneath his growing curiosity. It's just a show, he said more firmly, as if repeating it would make it true. It's not real. Lily didn't reply. Instead, she curled up in her favorite corner of the couch, pulling her knees to her chest and wrapping herself in the comforting cocoon of her blanket. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, but the questions in her mind were deafening. Why did the show feel so different? So strange? And why couldn't she stop thinking about it? She hugged her knees tighter, her thoughts circling endlessly, like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. That evening, the glow of the TV filled the living room once more, casting flickering light across their faces as Ethan and Lily settled into their usual spots. Their parents had gone to bed, and the house was theirs again, quiet and dark except for the soft hum of the television. They sat closer than usual, their small bodies drawn together as if sharing their unease could somehow make it less overwhelming. The scenes on the screen unfolded like a story they couldn't quite follow but couldn't turn away from. This time, the man and woman were dancing, their movements slow and deliberate, as if the world around them had faded away. The soft, haunting melody of the music filled the room, wrapping around Ethan and Lily like an invisible thread, pulling them deeper into the moment. Lily tilted her head, her fingers brushing the edge of the blanket as she watched intently. "Why are they dancing like that?" she asked quietly, her voice barely more than a whisper. There was no judgment in her tone, only the raw, unfiltered curiosity of a child trying to make sense of what she was seeing. "I don't know," Ethan replied, his gaze fixed on the screen. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees as he studied the way the man's hand rested gently on the woman's back, the way they swayed together in perfect, almost hypnotic harmony. It felt important, though he couldn't say why. "Maybe it's part of their game," he added after a moment, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Lily frowned, her small face thoughtful as she considered his answer. "But it doesn't look fun," she said softly, her words carrying a quiet weight that hung in the air between them. Ethan didn't respond. He couldn't shake the feeling that Lily was right. The show didn't feel like a game. It felt heavier, like a secret they weren't supposed to know but couldn't stop trying to uncover. The colors, the sounds, the expressions on the characters' faces, they all pulled him in, leaving him with questions he couldn't yet articulate. He glanced at Lily, wondering if she felt it too, but the look in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. The days turned into a quiet pattern, each night following the same routine. After the house grew still and their parents went to bed, Ethan and Lily would return to the living room, drawn by the glow of the TV like moths to a flame. Each time the scenes on the screen felt more intense, more mysterious. The man and woman's laughter became quieter, replaced by moments of tension that made Ethan's chest tighten. Their smiles faded into serious looks that lingered long after the scenes ended, and Ethan found himself thinking about them during the day, replaying their faces in his mind like a movie he couldn't turn off. Lily grew quieter too, her usual chatter replaced with thoughtful silences. She stopped humming while she drew, her crayons moving slower across the paper as if her thoughts were elsewhere. The questions in her mind felt bigger than she was, too big to say out loud. One afternoon, as they sat at the kitchen table, their drawings spread out before them, Lily finally broke the silence. "Ethan," she began hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you think we're supposed to watch it?" Ethan paused, his crayon hovering over the paper mid-stroke. Her words hit him like a jolt, shaking loose the unease he'd been trying to ignore. He didn't look up right away, staring at the half-finished picture on the page as if it held the answer. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Lily shrugged, her gaze fixed on her drawing. "It just feels like it's not for us," she said quietly, her words laced with a vulnerability that made Ethan's chest tighten. Ethan didn't know how to respond. He felt the same unease she did, the same quiet pull that told him they were stepping into something they shouldn't. But admitting it felt too big, too final. "It's just a show," he said finally, his voice firmer than he felt. "It's not real." But even as he spoke, the words felt hollow. The show wasn't just a show anymore. It was a question they couldn't answer, a door they couldn't seem to close. And as the images lingered in their minds, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking deeper into something far beyond their understanding. But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that their quiet fascination was leading them somewhere they weren't meant to go. The show had become more than a story. It was a puzzle they couldn't solve, a mystery they couldn't walk away from. And in their growing curiosity, they didn't realize that the answers they sought would come with consequences far beyond their understanding.